Today, I want to clarify specifically the difference between process and conditions and why it's so important to set up conditions so that you can actually go through your process in a way that allows you to get closer to the outcome. So, what do I mean by that? Let me take the note that I have here, read it for you, and then we can break it down. Put yourself in a space that you require to more reliably generate the process that you need. In other words, create the conditions such that your system of actions will be optimized. To break it down practically, what that means is when you wake up in the morning, you hear a lot of people say that they get their cup of coffee or they take a shower or and then they go into their office. As an example, if you work from home and they set up their desk, their office in such a way where there's no windows around, there's no sounds, they put their headphones on, they put white music, white noise on, they put ambient music on, or they listen to nothing intentionally. Those are conditions to actually go through your process. So, in other words, conditions, like you might set up conditions for meditation where you're in silence or you're in the darkness. That's a condition. The meditation is part of the process, but the best part about that is that everything feeds into anything else. So the process also feeds into the outcomes, which feeds back. It's a positive feedback loop. It feeds back into the process. Now, and the process alters based off of the actions that you're taking to either support the process or to not support the process and maybe support something else, which means that if I stop doing things on a regular basis, like exercising, eating healthy, working from X time on X thing and Y thing, then what's going to happen is, well, my life will change as a result of me changing the process. So I'll either find some other process and maybe no process at all. But then what that means is I will sacrifice inherently the outcomes, the benefits of the outcomes that I'm obtaining as a result of that process. So which means whether you do X or you do Y, there are predictable outcomes associated with both of those actions. So what you want to do is if you want to do X, you need to set up conditions that makes it more likely for you to do X. Okay. So specifically for me, what that means is when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I do is I take a shower, right? Because I like to invigorate my body. So I end with cold water, like I mentioned this before, and I do my stretches usually to kind of relax my body, and I'll get to work on something specific that I'm working on. Typically, I like to get down my habits first before I start to work on things because it allows me to basically prime and set up the conditions in my mind and in my physical space. So you guys know that I specifically talk about journaling and writing voice memos. So let's talk about those for a second, because when you set up conditions, you also want to set up your mental space. Because I wrote here, put yourself in a space that you require to more reliably generate the process that you need. When I say space, I mean a physical space and a mental space. That's why you always hear a lot of people say, like, clean up your workspace or make sure that you have a nice chair, because the chair is a condition for you to actually feel comfortable enough to work on something without thinking of like your back and your legs and your ass and whatever, right? So that's an external condition. An internal condition is, well, meditation. That's a good one, because the meditation is not an end in and of itself, but allows you to, if you can't, right, focus and concentrate and take control of your mind to do something that you want to do and be able to get into a space of pure awareness so that you can either generate insights or just enjoy the moment. So those are all benefits that you get from meditation. So meditation is one of those kind of rare activities where it's a part of the process, but it's also a condition that you create for your mind. So that's why I talk about these things, because especially the meditation, the exercise, journaling, and voice memos, those are all effectively conditions and processes in and of themselves. Another condition would be specifically what time, the calendar block that you have set up. So let's say, for example, you wake up at a certain time every day, and you know from X time to Y time, you're going to be doing this activity. Specify whatever activity. Now that activity technically is your process, and that restriction that you've specified are the conditions. So effectively, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a process that really works for what you're trying to accomplish. and then set up conditions so that you're constraining yourself to work on that process. The reason that's important is because even if you see the top performers in any field, whether it's, Steph Curry or Warren Buffett, Steph Curry shoots threes every day, every single day. He shoots threes every day. And I don't even know how long he does that for, maybe hours at a time. Warren Buffett, I'm sure he looks at reports all the time. So quarterly reports from different companies and whatever else that he does that on a daily basis that's related to his work. Now, they may not specifically, and Steph Curry as an example, because he's an athlete, these people, they need to have their recovery down and their diet down. So effectively, that's, again, part of the process, but part of the conditions for them to actually perform properly in the game. So you want to make sure that you're doing things that are not only part of the process, but are also conditions to make sure that you stay on the process. And then sometimes there are some occasions where those things that you do, they're conditions and part of the process. Now you have to think about, okay, well, what happens without the conditions? Well, without the conditions, it's very difficult, because if you don't have an alarm clock, if you don't have any clocks, period. So let's say, for example, we didn't have any concept of time written, right, that we could specify. We only relied on the sun, the movement of the sun. We wouldn't know exactly what time. We couldn't set up a calendar, because we would, let's say, for example, there were no objects to record time, like primitively. So you had nothing like that. That is an object that will set up a condition. So it allows you to structure your day. It allows you to structure your life in general. So remember that the things that are conditions that you're using to set up your life, they're either physical or non-physical. So they're in the physical world or in the non-physical world. So effectively, if you continue to scale up, what is the most important element of this whole process? Well, if you go back, 100,000 years when we had nothing, essentially, we had to use our minds to build tools, to construct things, structures, fires, so that we can survive and to thrive and to continue to evolve as a societal evolution. So effectively, what does that mean? Well, if you're using this as the primary tool, if you go all the way back, you're using what? A combination of two things that I mention all of the time: movement, so physical actions, and your ability to focus and to think. Those are the two most important things. So your ability to do and your ability to focus and to think. So if you focus on, effectively, that's also why I talk about, in general, you can't, it's very important to create a vision, or at least some kind of vague sense of where you want to go and what you want to be doing. And there's tactics and ways to actually help you discover that I've talked about previously, and I will talk about in the future as well. But what's really more important than the 5-year vision or the 2-year vision or the 1-year vision, the 6-month vision, all of those things are important to have a general sense of like where you want to go. But unless you do what's required of you in the day, every day, then that will not come to fruition. So it's a very simple equation. So let's say, for example, you want something that costs money 6 months from today, and you've calculated that if you do XYZ amount of work, let's say you work a job, let's say you're, in high school, 16 years old. I know you're probably not. And you're working some minimum wage job, you know that you have to work these amount of hours so that you can obtain this much money in this amount of time, so that you can actually get to the outcome that you want. So everything is related to what you're doing today, because if you don't do that, then it's really hard. First of all, you're not going to be consistent. You're going to start to, again, attack yourself with the judgments and the criticisms and the guilt and this and that. But also, you're not going to be very effective at using this gift that you've been given, which is your body, right? Your mind. So that's why I'm such a big advocate of caring for your body and your mind, like treating your body as a temple, because that is what's going to allow you to do the things on a regular basis, the process that's going to obtain outcomes, whether they're positive or negative. Because if they're negative, then you basically take the lesson that you learn from the negative outcome, you integrate that so you can avoid doing that again in the future. And if it's positive, you make a note of it and how it affected the outcome, so you can do more of that in similar situations. So the entire lesson of today's video is effectively setting up your life in a way, conditions, right? You're creating a system in which the thing will reside. And I remember speaking to a friend of mine that I used to work with. Genius. He's absolute genius. I think literally he was a genius, the only one I've ever met. And he This was back when I was working in operations in pharmaceutical manufacturing, more specifically cannabis. And he told me, and I'm like, how do I get this thing done? He said, instead of thinking about how to create the thing, think about what do you need to do? How do you create the system in which that thing will reside? So, which means if you look at any outcome, the outcome is associated, directly linked to a process, and that process has has constraints. So there are constraints. And then what you want to do is you want to create that feedback loop where you allow for activity so you can explore things that actually feed back into the process, right? So it's this constant like expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. Because during expansion, what you're doing is you're kind of letting things go that don't work, and you're giving room for things that do work, and then you contract it again. So that this is kind of like the motion, right? So you're expanding and then contracting, and then but again, you're still on the straight and narrow. And as you kind of figure out what works more and more, then it's going to be more obvious how you need to create that system. But again, your life is going to change. So it's also important to know that when the conditions do change of your life and you don't have any control over those conditions that do change sometimes, or some kind of tragedy that strikes, that you've set up your life in such a way in times of peace where you can actually be prepared for war, so to speak, or through chaos, because it's going to be very easy for you to fall apart in times of war, in times of chaos, if you haven't really built yourself to be strong in times of peace. And that's also why it's so powerful to start to build your process when you're in a time of chaos, or where you're in a time of war, because that in and of itself is going to allow you to more gracefully and more and with greater integrity move through it, not move past it or get over it. You see how my language is careful. It's to allow you to kind of move through it, so that way when that subsides, or it passes through the passage of time, that you actually feel stronger and you have reference points that you can use. It's like, hey man, I did this in this time. Like, it was hard, but I pulled it through. But if you're not at that point, like let's say for example, your life is a complete mess, so to speak. If you do have that moment of chaos or tragedy, it may break you, and you definitely don't want to get there, because it's a scary place to be. So I hope that was helpful for today. I just wanted to keep that in your mind, is that essentially from a large scale, everything kind of feeds in, right? So if you think about the outcomes associated with the process associated with the conditions associated with internal and external events that allows those conditions to actually exist. And if you scale back far enough, what was originally around, like say, when we were naked bodies out there in the wilderness with the spears, well, we fashioned the spears, so tools. So effectively, the ability for us to think and to create, to move, to make things. So that's why you have to really focus on your body. So your ability to actually take action, have energy, right? Mental energy, because the mental energy is not going to come from just like reading and doing all the stuff. It's going to come from like what you eat and how you use your body, if you're exercising or not, and sleeping, how you're sleeping, right? So sleep, diet, and exercise. Those are the three most important things for your body and mind. And then with the mind, again, if you're trying to accomplish something big, or you don't know what you're doing, but you want to be able to work diligently, then it's going to be very important for you to feed your mind and to get your mind to be able to focus, and concentrate on the thing that you want to concentrate on. And then also generate that level of awareness where you can notice what needs to be done. And sometimes just noticing that you're noticing is going to allow you to enjoy the present moment with whatever you're doing, whether you're doing anything or not. So hope that was helpful. It is Sunday. Hope that's going to be a great video to kick off your weekend, to remind you of all of those things, and wish you well. And I will see you soon.